All right, let's go ahead and get started this evening. We'll be picking up here in Genesis chapter 34 and might end up getting into chapter 35. We'll just see how things go. Let's go ahead and open with a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you that we can study it. We know that it's your desire and your plan for us to know you better. Father, give us the wisdom to apply your word in a wise manner, that we don't try to apply things that we shouldn't, but at the same time that we do apply the things that we should. And I'm convinced that as we study your word, that there's so much more that we can apply to our lives than we generally do. And so, Father, give us wisdom. It's our heart's desires to know you better each and every day. And I just thank you for each person that's here, or those who are online who are watching and studying along with us. Pray for safe travel as we go back and forth. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. Okay, Genesis chapter 34 is where we are picking up in. We got started in chapter 34, and as I was saying before prayer, is the hope and plan is to get through chapter 34, which I'm sure of, and we'll see how far, if at all, we get into chapter 35, because I really think that chapter 34 is an important chapter for us to look at, and to look at in a careful way. I think that there's, which is often the case with Scripture, I think that there's some misunderstanding as it relates to these events, and as we do look at this, again, we need to ask our question, or ask the question, because this is a bit interesting event that's in here. Why is this event told to us? Is the question I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we're thinking of this situation with Dinah, who gets raped, and remember, as we were looking at before, Jacob, he's left his brother. They got together and made up, and his brother Esau went back to his place, and Jacob went back into the land, and he settles in this area of Shechem, and he gets mingling with these Canaanites, and as a result, I shouldn't say as a result, but what ends up taking place is Dinah gets raped, and I don't really think that, don't take this the wrong way, it's not meant to be dismissive of this event, because it's a horrible, horrible thing that took place. I think rape is a horrible thing, and that's what took place here. But I think that the reason why this is in here isn't because of the rape of Dinah. I don't think that's why this is in here. And so as we look at this, hopefully, at the end we'll be able to answer the question, why does it seem like this event is being told to us? Because it seems like there's more involved than just the fact that this horrible atrocity took place to Dinah. So just by way of review, they're in the land of Shechem. Shechem is a very important location in the land of Israel. Shechem is also the name of the man who raped Dinah. His name is Shechem. His father is Hamor, who is apparently the king of that area. And so you've got this man Shechem and this land of Shechem. They are what's called Hivites. And if you go back to, and we won't go there unless you want to, we can, but if you're taking notes, if you go back to Genesis chapter 10, and if you go to 1 Chronicles chapter 1, we see that the Hivites are a descendant from Canaan, okay? And so he's a son of Canaan, who is the son of Ham, all the way back to Noah. And so this Hamor is a Hivite, and the Hivites, that's where they come from. And so we can trace their heritage and lineage because the Bible gives it to us. And that's part of, I think, the reason that we have this in here, is because we're going to see, as a result of what's going on with the rape of Dinah, there's a deal that's brokered between the brothers of Dinah and Hamor and Shechem, even though they didn't, the 12 sons didn't plan to keep that agreement, it's obvious that Jacob did. Jacob intended to keep the agreement of, we'll stay here and we'll give our daughters to your sons and your daughters will come to our sons. So it's apparent that Jacob was going to keep that agreement, which is a bit problematic when it comes to Jacob, because when you go back and you read, the events from Abraham and Isaac and even Jacob, it was no secret that marrying Canaanites, even though the law hasn't come through Moses yet, because under the law, once the Mosaic law comes, it was flat out against the law. But even here, we know that it was known that that wasn't what they needed to do. They shouldn't be marrying these people. And so there is a bit of an issue here with Jacob allowing this situation. But even that, I don't think that's the full thing that we need to understand. Although I do think that what we can glean from that point is that as we see the people of Israel, whenever they go into the land, when they finally get it, after Moses sends them away and Joshua leads them, what are the first things they start doing? They start taking and marrying wives from other people. We can see that from the beginning, they were pretty much ready to do that under Jacob here. So Abraham and Isaac, thankfully they didn't, but Jacob was ready to give his daughter to Canaanite men and take women for his sons. And so that, again, wouldn't be good. Keep in mind that this group, talking about the Hivites, this is a group that God, when you go to Exodus chapter 23, is specifically mentioned that God is going to overthrow them. So when we talk about the Exodus, whenever Moses leads the people and God tells the people of Israel, when you go into the land, I am going to hand these people over to you. This group, the Hivites, who Hamor and Shechem come from, God specifically mentions that he's going to give them into the hand of the people of Israel as a judgment. So keep that in mind. That's who we're dealing with here, is this group here. They're going to be driven out. This place, Shechem, is the place that Abraham first received God's promise regarding the promised land. Whenever Abraham came into the promised land, it was here at Shechem where he first received that promise. And so again, we see the importance. Whenever you've heard of the divided kingdom, whenever Israel and Judah separated, after Solomon died, basically you have the divided kingdom that takes place. You have Judah to the south with 2 tribes, and you have the 10 tribes of the north. Shechem is the place in which becomes the capital of the northern kingdom. So again, a very important place. Shechem is also the place, and I mentioned this before, where you have the 2 mountains that Israel had to pass through, where the blessings and the curses were pronounced upon them by God. Again, signaling as you as a nation that these blessings will come upon you and these curses will come upon you. And that is very relevant to the events of Acts chapter 2 and what is going on in Jesus' lifetime, because it wasn't a matter of 51% of people needed to accept Jesus as the Messiah. The nation had to accept. The covenant was to the nation. It couldn't just be, certain people to accept Jesus as Messiah. It was a national responsibility because their covenants were national in scope. And so again, we see that take place at Shechem. That's how important really Shechem really is into the grand scheme of things. And when you think about it, here in the United States, we think of some of the cities that our founding are very important. We may think of Philadelphia. We may think of, where the Battle of Bunker Hill takes place, or all these different famous cities and states that took place in our founding. Well, Shechem would be one of those for the nation of Israel. Shechem would be that important. So, yeah.
Does when Mary and Joseph, they had to not migrate, but return to their birthplace, right, for the consensus or the census? Did that have anything to do with like Judea in the south, and then Shechem and whatever was going on in the north?
Well, Mary and Jesus basically are living in Nazareth, and so Jesus is born in Bethlehem,
right.
And then they they move on eventually to Nazareth, and so that's where he's raised up.
Initially, they moved when she was pregnant.
Right. Yep.
And I was just wondering what the plan was to, no, it had to be because the Romans did a census.
Right. Yeah. So they lived. That's where up there is where they lived, and they came down to Bethlehem because of the prophecy and because of the
Close to
census.
Shechem, wasn't it?
Well, but Shechem is pretty close to Bethel, and Bethel's pretty close to Bethlehem.
Yeah.
And so all of those are within the same area. If I remember right, which you double check me, if I remember right, Shechem is about 35 miles from Jerusalem. So all of that stuff is down towards the southern
Right.
portion. And so, yeah, Shechem itself is really on the southern part of those two divided kingdoms. You had those two divided. Shechem was very much southern, and so just above the northern part of Judah. And so, yeah,
Israel was very much divided
yeah,
at that
yeah.
point.
So,
With the tribes.
yes, they were very much.
And just one other quick thing.
Sure.
Because I waited because I thought you might talk about it, but maybe it's not even relevant. But when you talk about God forbidding the Israelites from mingling with the Canaanites and the Hittites and
Right.
right, it also, when they did that, not only was it the women, but they wanted the cattle and their livestock and all that, and didn't in some way it dilute the law, like further help them or prevented them from following God's law at that time. Like, I don't know what his reason was.
As far as keeping them away from the other groups, I think part of it was, as we see, he's trying to create himself a special people,
Right.
and he was trying to keep them separate, which points to even us as Christians keeping ourselves separate. And so I think that there's types involved, and I think there's also lineage and heritage involved.
Sanctified.
Yeah, sanctified, that type of thing.
Set apart,
Mhm.
I think.
Yep. And so I think it has a lot to do with all that. But again, he was trying to show them, you are different. You've been called to be different. Therefore, be different. And if you're going to, even today, let's face it, it's not that we can't, have friends that don't maybe have the same strong moral beliefs that we do, but typically speaking, it's people that get drawn down by those who are doing things wrong versus people who are drawn up. In other words, we got to be careful who we hang out with, because it will corrupt us. And so we've got to be very, very careful about that.
From the world, not.
From the world, yeah.
I've heard, though, that when we do that Jesus was with all the.
Yep. But keep in mind, and if you didn't hear what she said, what Wendy said, because I've heard other people talk about this, that Jesus went into the sinners. I didn't come to call the righteous, but the sinners. That is very true. But notice what he did is he didn't go in there and, let's just hang out.
Party with them, yeah.
Yeah, he went in there to call them unto righteousness. He told them, you're a sinner. Matter of fact, whenever he was tempted by the Pharisees about the woman who had committed adultery, and they tried to tempt him, and he's drawn in the dirt and all that kind of stuff, and he says, let him without sin cast the first stone. But what does he say to the woman? Go and sin no more. So even with her, it was about calling her to righteousness. The people of Israel, they got it mixed up because, yes, they were supposed to be separate from the Gentiles, but they became so separate that they didn't become the light. They didn't express any light to them. And so there's a wisdom that we have to have today that we need to understand. There's a difference between us totally shutting the door on people in a wrong way, and at the same time us partaking in their folly. And we've got to be very, very, very careful. Matter of fact, Paul makes it very clear that whenever it comes to certain of those sins in particular, he says, don't even speak about it. It's that heinous, let alone for us to be involved with it in friendships with certain things. So.
And even Jesus, in ministering to the sinners, he didn't go into the sinning places like the brothels or the bars or the,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Right. He didn't go into their
Streets.
to their brothels. He didn't go into anything like that. But he did go into their homes and try to call them unto righteousness and try to express to them the truth. And so, yes, there is a separateness that needs to take place, a sanctified, a set apart, just like Wendy and Derek was talking about, for the purposes of bringing them in, because otherwise they're going to bring us into them.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just, so good points. Now the other thing I'll tell you, the last thing I'll tell you about Shechem, I've got it hanging on my wall in my office. One of my favorite quotes in Scripture is from the book of Joshua, chapter 24. Choose you this day whom you will serve. You remember that one? As for me and my house, we shall serve the... Where do you think that happened at? Shechem. Shechem is the place that Joshua says that. And so, again, I'm a history nerd, so I love knowing those little facts. And so I share that with you so that you can see that Shechem is an important town in the history of Israel. So, all right, Genesis
Can I ask
chapter...
one more question on
No,
that?
of course.
So,
Yeah.
since I've learned rightly dividing, I take phrases like that are two,
Mhm.
favorites of mine, and I try to find now where they fit, and they're for us, but not to us, so they're still
Yep.
good, right?
They're very much applicable to us. And that's the thing of having the wisdom to know what to apply, when to apply, how to apply it, and that type of thing. I think God has always had that approach when it comes to his people. Whether it's his people today, the body of Christ, or whether it was his people Israel before, or even whenever it was Noah or whoever. Choose who you're going to serve. That's what he wants you to do. And it's consistent with Christ. He said, I'd rather have you hot or cold, not lukewarm.
Yeah, spit you out.
And so, yeah, I think the concept of Joshua chapter 24 is very much applicable to us. The great thing is with Israel, we have to understand, and this is where people make the mistake when applying, with Israel, if you chose wrong, even though you're part of Israel, individually, you could lose your salvation. The promises to the nation of Israel is still going to take place, but guess what? Whenever it says all Israel shall be saved, that's all true Israel. There are many people, matter of fact, I can give you one Israelite that you can be sure isn't saved, and his name is Judas Iscariot. And so there's many individual Israelites who aren't saved. Matter of fact, there at the mountain, whenever the covenant was being made, thousands upon thousands were killed. We can't apply that part to us because once saved, always saved. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't want us to choose whom you're going to serve. And so we've chosen, we've been bought with a price, we've been chosen, we've chosen our side. So let's serve him, is the way to look at that. So, all right, Genesis chapter 34. We left off in verse 11, so we'll pick up reading verse 11. And Shechem said unto her father, again, this is Shechem, the son, the guy who raped Dinah, said unto Jacob, and unto her brother, let me find grace in your eyes. And what you shall say unto me, I will give. Ask me never so much dowry and gift, and I will give according as you shall say unto me, but give me the damsel to wife. And so again, this is where we talk about regardless of one's opinion on meting out the justification and the justice for rape, what we see here is that Shechem, who did this horrible thing, comes and asks for grace. It's just one chapter back that Jacob was asking for grace to Esau. Matter of fact, what does he tell Esau whenever he sees him? He says it's like the face of God. Why? Well, because God gave him grace, and now Esau gives him grace for the things that he did. And now here we see in chapter 34, as bad as this is, and I'm not saying if somebody raped my daughter and came and asked forgiveness, I'm not saying that I would forgive or I could forgive. That's not the point. The point here is what we're seeing here is this guy comes and he's trying to own up and he's trying to marry her. The big problem I think we're going to see here with Jacob and the sons is that what they give here was injustice. And so they promised grace and instead came judgment, and that is not the way God ever works. And so here they come and ask for grace, and he says, I'll ask me any dowry and gift. In other words, I will give you any amount for a dowry. Remember, a dowry was money that was set aside, given to the family in case this husband didn't provide for the wife, and so it was money that would be there in case they end up having to take care of the daughter again. And so here he says, ask me any dowry and gift for your daughter. Verse 14, and they said unto them, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one that is uncircumcised, for that were a reproach unto us. But in this we consent unto you, if you will be as we be, that every male of you be circumcised, then will we give our daughters, notice the plural, give our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. And so the idea to actually do all of this part, who does it come from? Does it come from, Shechem and all of them? What we see here is this idea of, if you get circumcised, then we can make this work. And there's a number of problems with doing what they did. And ultimately this comes down to they did this deceitfully, is what they did. Is they deceitfully trick these people. And so, but let's keep reading here. But we will consent, verse 15, and if every male of you be circumcised, then will we give our daughters, and we'll take your daughters. But if you will not hearken unto us to be circumcised, then will we take our daughter, and we will be gone. And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. And so again, there is no real intention by the 12 sons of Jacob to keep this deal. Certainly not by two of them, Levi and Simeon. You might be able to try to suggest that the other 10 followed suit after what Levi and Shechem is going to do, or Levi and Simeon is going to do. But the fact of the matter is there's no plan for them. And again, it's going to say that they did it deceitfully, is what it says there in verse 13. Notice what it says. Did I even read verse 13? I don't know if I did. Verse 13, the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, deceitfully, and said, because he had defiled Dinah, their sister, that we cannot do this thing. And so here you have the commentary from God that whenever they answered and said that we can't do this because of circumcision, that they were being deceitful. And the fact that you're being told that tells you, I think, amongst other things we're going to see, God is not pleased with how this is handled. It's not appropriate to what they did. Part of that, I think, is not only did they deceitfully say that you that they were going to agree with it, and they had no intention to, but also they used the token of circumcision. I mean, circumcision, where did that come from? Speak up.
The Lord. I mean, it was
Right. It was instituted to Abraham, right? So that's instituted to Jacob's grandfather as a token of a covenant that God made about a gift. So here you have the 12 sons taking the token which shows God's grace of giving something that was undeserved and using it in a spiteful way, in a deceitful way. That is literally the idea of taking God's name in vain. That is that same thing. And so they're twisting this thing, this token about the idea. And I see that today whenever we think of the rainbow and how that's used today. And thankfully you don't see too many Christians using the rainbow in the way that the world wants to today. And if you do see a Christian using it in that way, they should be pointed out. Wait a minute. That belongs to God. He assigned what that's about. And the same thing for these 12 sons.
That's such a good example, because I see that as, Satan, the father of all lies, just twisting that around and
Mhm.
using that,
Yep.
diminishing the value of it in the Bible and elevating it
Yep.
in the secular world. And that's
Right? And so then whenever you see what the 12 are doing here, it's taking something that was set apart, that was holy unto God, and using it for their revenge. And so I think that's not good. Again, what they end up doing is not justice. At the very end of this, they're going to suggest that this is some sort of a justice thing. As I said, justice does not pronounce one judgment and then give another. Imagine you go to court and you committed some sort of a crime, no matter how small it is, and the judge says, okay, you're going to get this fine, and then you walk out of the room and they handcuff you and you're going to go to jail for 30 years. Nobody would think that was right. And so we got to make sure that we take our emotions out of this. Yes, it's horrible what happened to Dinah, but the idea of taking what they did was saying, we're going to do this, here's this matter, we judge it this way, and then do another. That is in no way justice, what takes place here. And so now, had they been forthcoming and forthright and said, you know what, we're not going to give you grace. This means war. I mean, at least you would have had some merit to stand on. But what they're doing here, in my opinion, has no merit to stand for. Again, this is what they're doing, not really God's way at all. So. But let's keep on reading until the end of the chapter here. So, verse 18, and the words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son, and the young man deferred not to do the thing. In other words, he didn't hesitate. He wasn't putting it off. He was ready to seal the deal, and so he's ready to do it because he had delight in Jacob's daughter. And he was more honorable than all the house of his father. And so what you're going to see here is they're going to go and they're going to talk to the rest of the people, which, again, to me is a pretty hard sell. So.
Why does it say, was it he was more honorable, or that?
Yeah, he was more honorable, meaning he was more respected in the community, in Hamor's kingdom. Apparently, most commentators suggest, and it seems to make sense in the text, that this man Shechem, his son, was of more honor than everybody. So that's how he was able to convince other people to go along. And I mean, let's face it. If I was uncircumcised and somebody says, "Hey, I want to marry this woman. Do you mind getting circumcised?" I'd be like, that's your problem, sucker.
But he's the same one that raped her.
Right.
But he was more honorable.
Well, no, more honorable in the eyes of the people, his people. Not so much more honorable, meaning he was honorable, more honorable in the eyes of his people, and that's how he's able to convince them. Because it's kind of like this: if you get on the good side of the second in command, that's probably a good guy to get on the good side of. So, Wendy, go ahead.
Well, that answered my question, because it made me question, did he truly rape her, and did she like him? Because if you read on, it sounds like they were already acting like they were married or together, and maybe. Well,
what we're going to find out is it sounds like there in how this comes into play. I'm not sure, and there's a little bit of in the book of speculation here. What we're going to find out is that Dinah is actually still back at Hamor and Shechem's place. It doesn't appear as though they brought her whenever they went to talk to Jacob, because when Jacob's sons, they go and they pillage, it's then that they grab Dinah and bring her with them. And so it seems as though that Dinah gets raped and is kept in the palace there or whatever, and Hamor and Shechem come and talk to Jacob and don't bring her with them is what it appears to be. And so I again, it's a book of speculation if because it seems to me like, based upon the tradition of that time, you probably wouldn't have sent your daughter back until there was this marriage, ceremony, until the actual circumcision took place. So I think that she actually never came back. So,
That could also explain why the brothers had to be so deceitful, because they had to find
Could
a way
be.
to get her back without full-on war killing everybody, but then they didn't.
I mean,
kill
yeah,
anybody.
yeah, and so again, we have to keep in mind and be careful on how much we judge these matters, because there are things we don't know. What we don't know is part of it, and so, yeah, and so there's going to be this expectation that all the people of that town there all the men get circumcised again, which you would naturally think would be a hard sell, unless you're really interested in pleasing both Hamor and Shechem. Verse 21, these men are peaceable with us. Therefore let them dwell in the land and trade therein. For the land, behold, it is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us for wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only herein will the men consent unto us for to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. And here should beg another question. Throughout all of this, there is no reference that Jacob or the sons tried to expose Shechem and Hamor to the God of Israel. It's you get circumcised, and it's almost this legalistic, ritualistic religion approach to it. If you do this, we're in like Flynn and we can do this. But does anybody think for a moment that that's what God would have him do? Or do you think that they would try, do you think God would say, okay, if you're going to bring them into part of it, then I need to be the one that they're looking to? And yet you don't see throughout any of this any God really involved here in the minds and the aspects of Jacob or the 12 sons. There's no idea of exposing these people to the God of Israel, who the true and living God is. There doesn't seem to be any desire for that whatsoever. It's just simply, we can't do this unless you get circumcised. And to me, I think you can already see the idea of religion very much creeped into this idea. And so, to me, that's one of the lessons that we need to learn from this is right from the beginning here. You don't see the heart's desire of saying, you know what, you want to be part of us? Well, let me tell you about our God, the true and living God, the God who's done this thing in our lives. There doesn't seem to be any desire for that, at least what's mentioned. And so, to me, that's one of the things that stands out here. Verse 22, only herein will the men consent, and that's if all the males get circumcised. Verse 23, shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Kind of, I think, possibly gives a little indication of the mindset of even Hamor and Shechem, is the idea that, there's financial gain. Now, I'm not in the mind of Hamor and Shechem. Is this part of the, trying to sell the idea of getting circumcised? Who knows? But this is apparently what they said. Shall not their cattle and their substance, every beast of theirs be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they will dwell with us. And unto Hamor and unto Shechem his son hearkened all that went out of the gate of his city. Keep in mind, the gate of the city is also the place where the most prominent people were. And every male was circumcised, all that went out of the gate of the city. So all of the men were circumcised. Verse 25, and it came to pass on the third day, when they were sore, that the two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brethren, took each man his sword, and came upon the city boldly, and slew all the males. And so you've got two of the 12 sons who go and do this, and apparently what I think we're being told here is that Levi and Simeon are full brothers to Dinah, and so some of the other brothers, they're half brother. That's her half sister, and so maybe that's part of the reason why these two cared the more, which to us seems like a legitimate response, or at least maybe a common response. Whether it's legitimate or not can certainly be argued. But Levi and Simeon says each one of them took a sword, and they came upon the city boldly and slew all the males. And if you can imagine, if you're an adult male and you get circumcised, you are going to be hindered in battle for a number of days. You're going to be hindered. And so, to me, it's also interesting that it was on the third day that they did that. I can't wait to get to glory and find out why it was the third day. It's little things like that that I'm like, wait a minute, tell me about that. I want to know why it was the third day. Because to me, I don't.
The third day they were sore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know, but why the third day?
First day.
Huh?
Yeah.
They'd be sore the first day.
Yeah, they'd be sore the first day.
Or when the
You know.
infection kicked in. That's what I thought I heard that.
What's that?
The infection.
The infection? Yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested, but to me, I don't think it's a the fact that it's mentioned the third day, to me, is not a coincidence.
Just the whole thing about circumcision, you know, in general, or just that procedure itself, or that, well, I guess sort of a ritual, and that it was, you know, it was an Jewish thing.
Mhm.
And then it's also only men. It's a, what do you call it? Not generic. Genetic.
Yeah.
Not
Genital.
Gender,
A sexist.
gender thing.
Gender thing.
Yeah, sexist thing.
Sexist.
Yeah, a gender thing. Because that's the male organ.
Sure.
I don't know what the significance is. I was just rabbit holing that. But
No, rabbit holing is a good thing in Bible study. So yeah, I mean, to me, I think it's interesting why the third day, because it's not an accident that it was told to us the third day. You know, to me, that's one of those little nuggets that we don't know, but in the future we can probably find out what the relevance of, if anything, to it. So, but what we see is Levi and Simeon. We don't know the size of this town. We don't know how large of a city or town, how many men this would be. But under however they did it, they went in there and snuck in and were able to kill, as it says here, verse 26, and they slew Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went out. So here we see that Dinah was in Shechem's house at this point. And so,
But they didn't kill any of the women.
well, they're going to take the women. They're going to take the women and the little ones and all of that. And so what's going to end up happening is the other 10 brothers are going to say, "Ooh, we can whip on in there and we can kind of get wealthy out of this." And so that's what's going to end up happening, is they're going to go in and get that stuff. Did you start to say something?
Yeah, I
No.
was just I'm still back on the circumcision thing.
Sure.
Was that a rite of passage when it was done? It was to be in the 7th day, 6th day,
Yeah,
Eighth.
8th day.
8th day from birth.
Mhm.
But then they're doing it with adult males, so as they could become part. But they didn't talk about God.
Right. No,
They just
it's
talked about circumcision.
right.
Was it there's some plan there? Well, I mean it's speculation, but to weaken them. For some
Well,
reason, or-
and so there is some speculation on there, because we
Rite of
see
passage.
that, and I think that's one of the things in verse 13 that we see that commentary by God that they deceitfully said. So
Yeah.
they had their heart intent on deception.
and they knew it was wrong.
Right, they knew it was wrong, and as we're getting ready to see, there are ramifications for eternity
Right.
for this event.
Right.
And so, again, it becomes important. And so, yeah, you know, but they go in and they kill the males. And as it reads here, verse 27, the sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city, because they had defiled their sister. They took their sheep and their oxen and their asses and that which was in the city and that which was in the field, and all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives took they captive, and spoiled even all that was in the house. And here we're going to get Jacob's reaction to this, and so we see that all 12 of them get involved, and we see Simeon and Levi were the main perpetrators. But here in verse 30, and Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have troubled me to make me to stink among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Pizzites, and I, being few in number, they shall gather themselves together against me and slay me, and I shall be destroyed, I and my house." And here's the response that he gets back. And they said, should he deal with our sister as with a harlot? And again, this idea of a harlot is, you know, if you're thinking in the prostitute sense or something, you're going to think of a woman who, you know, a person who goes in and enjoys the woman and then pays for it afterwards, you know. And in that day and age, again, if you wanted a wife, you went in and you arranged for it, and then you enjoyed the privileges of having a wife. And here, what do we see? We see Shechem doing it the exact opposite. And so, yes, they're right about that he did deal with her as a harlot, but again, what they did was wrong. There's no really ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so they dealt deceitfully. Again, it was not justice. It was saying that you're going to do one thing and then doing another. And if somebody comes to you and says, I'm guilty of this charge, I plead for grace on this, and you say, okay, I'll give you grace, and then you sneak in and kill them, well, it's hard to defend that. Yeah, Wendy?
So, a history buff question.
Yep.
So, in my mind, I always try to imagine their houses and imagine their lives and imagine these people. Are they just slightly above cavemen? I mean, are they?
What's interesting is well, put it this way. Most of them were going to be made out of brick homes, and so they would have had, you know, brick or stone, depending on what area they were in and how big they were of a group. Because if you're a big enough group, then you had, you know, organized quarries and stuff like that going on. But yeah, they would have mud and brick homes, to which they would have usually, if they've got enough thatch areas around, roofs and stuff like that. You get a little bit later. I was having this conversation with somebody today. In the say 5th, 6th, 7th century BC, so 500, 600 BC, before Christ, Rome and Carthage were more advanced than the United States in 1800. They had running water. They had hot and cold water going to their kitchens. They had sewage that pumped the sewage out of their cities. And so there were towns which had some pretty, you know, extravagant, we would understand, ideas. But again, these smaller towns, you know, maybe about 10,000 people or, you know, 5,000 people, you would expect there to be the wealthy and the very poor, and you would have brick homes and very small and very humble. So a couple of things that I noticed from this chapter, again, as we talked about, is this dealing deceitfully the way that they did, and how that was wrong. And again, keep in mind, and we'll look at this a little bit more later, but the fallout that's going to take place as a result of we'll turn there. Turn to Genesis chapter 49. We see that Jacob is pronouncing his blessings on his sons. Genesis 49, verse 1, it says, And Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. So he's getting ready to prophesy about his sons. And verse 5 is where we get to Simeon and Levi. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret or unto their assembly. In other words, their council. Don't come to their council, their assembly. Mine honor, be not thou united, for in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they dig down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. Now here's the prophecy for them. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And so this is the prophecy. And if it's prophecy, that means it comes from who? God. Okay? So This is prophecy. Jacob is acting as a role of a prophet, and he's telling what's going to happen to them. And so one of the things that I think that's very important about this chapter, why is this event even told to us? Is it really about Dinah? Is it really about Shechem and Hamor? And I don't think that it really is. I think that it comes down to is whenever you start to see how things are going to play out with the 12 tribes, and especially as it relates to how the land allotments take place once Moses and Joshua dole out the land to the different tribes. What takes place in that is traceable to this event. And so I think that this event is told to us specifically as it relates to Levi and Simeon and what happens. Keep in mind that, and I've alluded to this before, and we'll study it more later again, just for context purpose. Whenever the land is divided, Simeon is given land within Judah. So Judah's land, and within there is a small area that's given to Simeon. And Simeon becomes such a small group later after that they're almost not even found. Go ahead.
I was curious about that too, and I didn't want to reveal my ignorance about that, but the tribes, the 12 tribes, it was like 10 went, which way was it? 2 went?
10 up north and 2 at the bottom.
Okay. And which ones were they? Like, was it divided as the children of the 2 wives?
No, Judah and Benjamin are down at the bottom,
Yeah,
and then the 10 are up top.
Judah and,
Benjamin.
yeah, and that was Judah, was the capital, and then.
Judah is where Jerusalem is, yep.
Right.
Yep. So, and Benjamin is the town in which Bethlehem is, which David's from, and Jesus
And the
was born.
northern one is,
Northern is called Israel once the divided, and Judah is called the bottom, which coincidentally is, you wonder how we get the term Jews from. It's from Judah. And so, but yeah, those 10 tribes are up north, and they're the ones that get taken into Assyrian captivity. Judah sticks around, and they're the ones that Jeremiah prophesies about going into Babylonian captivity. And so, in the whole story with Esther and all of that stuff. So, but yeah, and so what do we see here is Simeon's going to get that small allotment and be scattered inside of Judah. And then Levi, again, Levi doesn't get a land allotment, does he? No.
So he's not listed in that.
He gets, what he gets is certain cities, because Levi becomes a priest, the priests. And so they don't get it. And the reason that I think we see that Levi gets the priesthood is because there is a level of redemption that Levi performs. At Mount Sinai, whenever Moses goes up and God says, oh, by the way, go look at what the people are doing, and you had all those people rebelling, when Moses comes and says that the people who committed this had to die, it was the Levites who said, okay, and they picked up the sword, and they're the ones that went and met out God's justice.
you know, were they the only ones allowed to go in to the tabernacle? Or?
Yes, into the temple and to the tabernacle.
Because they were the roadies too, I call them.
Yeah,
That set up everything, but.
yep. And so the Levites become the priests, and so the priests don't get land assigned to them, and so that's one of the reasons why they get the
Privilege.
tithes go to them, and because they don't get a land allotment. Do what?
Which is interesting because they get 10% of 11,
Yeah,
and then I think what is 10% of it go back to the priesthood or to the, and they keep the rest.
yes.
So they get 100%. So
Yeah.
you see what I'm saying?
And so, yeah,
They
but
get the land,
But what's also interesting, even in that story and in other ones, is there's another lesson from that. So because of this event, there's a pronouncement, almost like a judgment on Simeon and Levi. And it's hard to argue that it isn't really a judgment for what they did. It really appears to be. But then even when Levi, steps up and does the right thing, God doesn't say, okay, I'll change my mind and not do the judgment. Now, what he does is he does something which obviously he knew he was going to do, but the judgment is pronounced. And we see this oftentimes whenever God does this, whenever the people of Israel, whenever they refused to go into the land of Israel, and they sent out the spies, and they came back and said that, you had the spies that came back and said that, oh, there's giants, we shouldn't go in there. God enacted a judgment on the people of Israel for that, and he kept that. Ahab, when we studied Ahab, whenever he committed the atrocities that he did, Elijah pronounced a judgment on Ahab regarding Ahab and his sons. Then what happens? Ahab repents. And God says, because he repented, I won't make those things happen to his family in his lifetime. He won't have to see it. But God didn't take back the judgment. And so we apply that when God pronounces a specific judgment on people, just like the tribulation. You go to Daniel chapter 9. Why is the tribulation there? The tribulation is there is to make atonement for sins that Israel did. This is one of the reasons why we can understand that you and I aren't meant for the tribulation. That is a judgment that is applied to the nation of Israel and those who are rejecting God up until the end of this day of grace. And so we see this consistency by God on how he does things. If he pronounces a judgment, he may not pronounce a judgment. And he may give you grace, but if he does pronounce a judgment, that's what it is. And so I think that's one of the things that we can learn from this. Another thing I would say we can learn from this is in a practical sense. Parents are always looking for practical things to apply. To me, the whole idea that two wrongs don't make a right is right here embedded into this story. When parents are looking for biblical lessons to tell their children around the campfire, so to speak, this is one of those that you can use. The two wrongs don't make a right in God's eyes. You're not justified for doing a wrong just because somebody else did. And so, again, I think that's important for us to understand. I think the idea that we see here that it wasn't enough to introduce the people where Shechem and Hamor from, introduce them to this legalized aspect of circumcision and not introduce them to God. It's kind of like, today, if you forget the gospel when it comes to, trying to introduce people to, I'm all for you introducing people to church, but I'd rather you introduce them to Jesus. That's the important thing. And so, again, applying that lesson in our own lives. So again, I think that there's many things that we can apply in that. So the idea of not extending the truth. Those people needed to know the truth more than they needed needed sons and daughters to exchange marriage vows. So to me, the reason for the original question, why this event is told to us, really comes down to these different reasons. So, any other?
I thought you were going to say, rather than be circumcised as an adult, as particularly a male.
Yes.
Yikes.
I would rather you introduce our church and Jesus to people than introduce them to circumcision.
Right.
So yes. And I'll be honest with you, even we laugh at that. But think of that. Here in the United States, I don't know about it anymore, but tradition. Circumcise your
Unless you say not to.
right. Circumcise your son, but how many parents then don't introduce their son to Jesus? And so think of that aspect of things. So all right. Any other comments on chapter 34? Chapter 35. Chapter 35 kind of changes the flow of things here. We won't really get into the verse-by-verse study of it. We'll just kind of give you a little bit of summary of it. Here in chapter 35, Jacob is going to return to Bethel. Remember what Bethel means? Is the house of God. Remember, El is God, and Beth is house. And so Bethel is the house of God. And so Jacob is going to leave Shechem area, and he's going to head and he's going to go to Bethel. And this is the place where God confirmed his covenant with Jacob. And what covenant I'm talking about is the Abrahamic covenant. So this is the place in where he's going to, where God confirmed it to him before he left. Look at Genesis 28. 28 verse 13, and we have that event. And so it says in verse 13, and behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land wherein thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth. And thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and I will keep thee in all places where you go, and will bring you again unto this land. For I will not leave you until I have done that which I have spoken of thee. And so here you have this. That happens at Bethel. And so God confirms the Abrahamic covenant with Jacob here in this location. And so that's one of the things that we're seeing that's taking place here. You also see that Rachel is going to die. Rachel is the mother of two of Jacob's sons, and that is going to end up being the cause of her death. Really, is she's given birth to Joshua already, and as they're traveling, she's going to give birth to Benjamin, and that is when she dies. And so she has two of the sons, and so she's going to die in this chapter. And also, we're going to see that Jacob's father Isaac is going to die in this chapter, and that's not the only deaths. Apparently, again, this is why I'm saying we don't know what we don't know. One of the things that appears to take place is Rachel's handmaid somehow, had served Rachel, but apparently is traveling at this point with Jacob. And so, did she leave Rachel whenever she died and go spend and go move and live with Jacob? Was she the one that brought the news? And so, and I'm saying Rachel, but I mean Rebecca. Rebecca is Jacob's mom. And so I said the wrong name there. But that Rachel's going to die. Rebecca's handmaid, Jacob's mom's, is going to die. And so this is an interesting chapter here with a lot of different things. And so one of the questions that commentators ask themselves, and to me the answer is no, but they say that Jacob was wrong and he didn't show faith in God whenever he went to Shechem. So that last chapter we read, most or a lot of commentators want to blame all on Jacob because he didn't have enough faith, and said that he never should have went to Shechem, that he was supposed to go to Bethel. And the problem with that is that it's not until chapter 35 verse 1. Look at chapter 35 verse 1. And God said unto Jacob, Arise, go up to Bethel, and dwell there, and make there an altar unto God, that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. God had previously told Jacob to leave his father-in-law, but all he said was to go back into the land of your father. He didn't say go back to Bethel. Here he says go to Bethel. And so it's kind of hard to blame Jacob for going to Shechem because there doesn't appear to have been any instruction that he had to go to Bethel first. And so, again, that's one of the things I don't like whenever we get specific where God is vague. We need to be vague where he is vague and specific where he is specific. And that's a discipline that we have to apply. And sometimes sometimes you may hear me get specific, where God is vague. And it's important that I keep myself, or you guys keep me in check, and make sure that we keep that in mind. So, but this is the place in chapter 31 in chapter 31 is whenever we see that Jacob was told to leave, and he was only told to go back to the land, and so we don't have any information that he was supposed to go to Bethel itself. But
And then when he left his brother, didn't he kind of just go a little bit and just stop because this was a good place to stop?
well, he started going, and then he sent emissaries. He sent people to Esau, and so he started to look to restore that relationship. So he sent people to Esau, and waited for a return on that, and then he met up with Esau, and Esau wanted him to go with him, and he said no, and so Esau returned to his land, and Jacob went into the land that was promised to Shechem, and the land of the promise, which Shechem was part of that promise. Matter of fact, how do we know that? How do we know that Shechem was part of the land? Where was Abraham when God told him that I was going to give you the land? He was all in this area, and so it's to me again people suggesting that Jacob was wrong. I'm not going to go there. So, all right. Any questions on anything or comments? Next week we'll start in Genesis 35, verse 1. Any questions or comments? Okay.